And we're live.
Welcome to the Transformational CFO, a forum presented by Williams Marston,
where we will explore innovative strategies that influential CFOs and other finance leaders deploy as they navigate critical transitions and drive transformations in these challenging times. I'm Landon Williams.
I'm John Marston, and we are the co-founders of Williams Marston.
Our guest today is Brian Shortsleeve. Brian is the co-founder and managing director of M33 Growth, a middle market private equity firm investing in emerging technology and healthcare companies. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Landon. It's great to be here today.
Great to have you. So, Brian, you've had a fairly unique career path. After college, you started out in the Marine Corps, after which you joined private equity, and then you took a detour into public service and led the MBTA for a couple of years. And then you went back to private equity, co-founding M33 Growth, a growth-focused private equity firm working with technology companies. How have these experiences shaped your leadership philosophy?
Well, Landon, thanks for having me on today. It's a great podcast. And I think I've been really blessed in life to be able to pursue a lot of things I'm really passionate about. I love building companies and helping companies scale. I also personally have a passion for public service. As you mentioned, after college, I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. My grandfather was a Naval Academy grad. And when my time came to serve, I joined the Marine Corps after graduating from college. And that was an amazing leadership experience. I think one thing about the military is at a very young age, you get a lot of direct exposure to leading Marines, in my case, or sailors. And I think a lot of the lessons in leadership and character that I've learned, I probably learned in those early years in the Marine Corps when I was 22, 23 years old.
That's great. And what attracted you to venture capital and private equity? And ultimately, what inspired you to launch your own firm?
Well, I started after the Marine Corps, I went to Harvard Business School. When I was at HBS, I worked at Bain Consulting for the summer, and I worked in Bain's private equity group. So Bain Consulting's got a phenomenal private equity consulting business that does diligence on customer market work on deals. So post business school, I went back to Bain and Co. And I spent 2.5 years at Bain, and it was a blend of strategy consulting work, which was incredibly useful. You learn a ton about driving value in businesses, helping businesses scale revenue, and I did a lot of the private equity diligence work. I really enjoyed the private equity work. So my path into private equity was really starting at Bain Consulting, being exposed to it there, and then moving into investing at a firm called HIG Capital, which was a Florida-based firm. I was part of their Boston team, and then eventually joined General Catalyst Partners in Cambridge and built the growth equity investing team there over the course of several years. But, what do I love about investing? How did I get into it? What I always really enjoyed about it is you live with the decisions you've made. As a consultant, you give advice and you try to help clients move the right direction. But as an owner of companies, as an investor of companies, you live with those decisions for a long time. So there's a certain level of accountability and long-term connection with the companies that you have as an investor that I've always really loved.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, for those of us that have built companies, there's nothing more rewarding than creating jobs and opportunities for people and leaving a legacy at the end of your career. So I'm sure that's part of your inspiration as well. Before starting your most recent firm, M33 Growth, you spent a couple of years leading the MBTA. The financial challenges of the MBTA are fairly well known. Any lessons from that experience that you'd like to share?
Sure. Well, it was about 10 years ago right now, which in the spring of 2015, when Governor Baker called me and asked me to take a couple years away from investing and lead a mission at the MBTA to try to put the business on or put the organization on a track to fiscal stability. When I stepped into the T in the summer of 15, I told the gov I'd give him 2 years and then I really needed to get back to business and back to my family. But the organization was facing a $335 million operating deficit that was going to put it on a path to either bankrupting itself or costing taxpayers a lot of money. And there were big challenges vis-a-vis both controlling costs and driving revenue. So what I learned, there was if you do step in and approach things in a very data-driven way, even in a public organization, it's not a business. It runs differently than a business. But at the end of the day, when you're facing a $300+ million deficit, you got to get costs growing slower than revenues. At some point, you will balance your budget. So we really took a bottoms-up approach at the T. We looked at every element of the cost structure, from labor to outside services to areas we could partner with the private sector. We were sort of identified close to 40 opportunities for saving money. And then we looked at a lot of things on the revenue side, like really leaning into parking revenues and advertising. We had all these amazing stations that people walk through every day that we could monetize in digital advertising. So it's sort of an all hands on deck focus on controlling cost, running leaner more efficiently, and try to couple that with driving revenue that enabled us to close that deficit. It took about 2 years to do, and when we had it done in 2019, it was the first balanced budget for the T in more than a decade, and the lowest operating expenses at the T in about 20 years. So these things are doable, but I think it takes a data driven approach and really a focus on questioning every cost in the organization.
That's great. Yeah, we need more people with that perspective in government these days. So congratulations, that's amazing.
Hell, there's still plenty of work to be done in that organization, but I certainly really enjoyed my time at the T, and it's a critical institution for Boston. So I'm always cheering for it to continue to improve and get better.
And many other areas of government
Yeah,
could use that
yeah.
help as well. Well, helping technology companies grow is a big part of what your firm is known for. In your experience, what tends to hold companies back the most, and how has your firm helped leadership teams overcome those barriers?
We are really passionate about what I'd call the lower end of the market or the foundational end of the market. And by that I mean investing in companies that are founder-led bootstrap businesses, which have not taken any outside capital, um, and are sort of looking for a partner to help them scale. So our businesses are not fancy venture-backed businesses that have raised, millions of dollars in venture capital. They tend to be businesses that are run by founders that were in a particular vertical market. It could be they were in environmental compliance for convenience stores. It could be they were in communications technology for utilities. They could be they were in compliance for wastewater management facilities. So it tends to be very verticalized and very niche. And generally, our founders are folks that have used technology to solve a really hard industry problem. So when we meet them, they've probably got 50 to 100 customers. It's all enterprise B2B software. So they're probably getting paid 50 to 100 grand per customer. They got a $5-6 million revenue business. They've done it without any outside capital. I mean, these are great stories. These are great American success stories. But the question is, it's taken me 8 years to get from 0 to 5 million of revenue. How can I get from 5 million to 20 million in 3 or 4 years? And that's where we come in. And what we love about the bootstrap businesses generally is they've got great unit economics because they had to scale their business without outside capital. So they solve hard problems. They have high retention. We tend to help them really scale up on the sales and go-to-market side, and also help them pursue acquisitions, acquire smaller businesses in their space that could be very accretive.
I mean, we see with our client base at Williams Marston that once companies hit 30, 35 employees, they just tend to need a bit more of a professional advisors around them to
Mhm.
help them get to the next level. And having a sophisticated investor like M33, I'm sure, is enormously helpful as they get to that next level.
And it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work
Yeah.
for the teams, a lot of work for us. I mean, we're generally investing in companies, as I said, that are long on domain experience, long on happy customers, long on great retention, but they're running on QuickBooks. They've probably never built a classic modern go-to-market engine in sales and go-to-market. So we're getting them off QuickBooks onto Intact or NetSuite. We're often bringing in the first CFO. We're getting them on Salesforce or HubSpot. We're starting to do inbound demand generation. There's a lot of technology and a lot of process these days for what best-in-class B2B software selling looks like, and that's a blend of people, processes, and technology. And generally, when we partner with companies, we're helping them implement all that, and none of it's easy. It all takes time for our founders, for us, for the folks we bring in. I mean, I think I was looking at a chart recently because we've got our annual meeting coming up, and I think what I saw was that we'd placed over 60 executives in the last 12 months in our company. So it's a big build of
Wow.
people, technology, and process to take a $5 million software business and turn it into a $20 million software business in 3 years.
Wow. Is it a fairly repeatable approach as you go in and help them scale? I mean, is there kind of a secret sauce to it?
Well, you know what? I would tell you the industries are different and the problems are all the same. So, yeah, I got great software businesses that serve the convenience store vertical, that serve the utility vertical, that serve the field services vertical for like HVAC and mechanical contractors, that serve financial services. These are very diverse end markets, right? And you would think that the problems are very diverse. And guess what? The problems are all the same, right? Here's the number one problem. I want to find more customers. I found the first 50 that are the naturals, and they really synced up with me well for these following reasons. But now I got to find the next 150. That's a little harder. So, what's your ideal customer profile? What are characteristics we could think about that enable you to look out there at this sea of 10,000 opportunities and pick the 300 to go after where you can actually close half of them versus the 8,000 to go after where you're going to close 10 out of 8,000, right? So that whole process of like, what is my ideal customer profile? Let's really understand it. And then let's go build a sales and go-to-market organization that finds more customers that look like that. Every company we interact with, that's challenge. Doesn't matter who they're selling to. That's one example. There are many.
Well, that's a great segue into zeroing in on the finance side for a minute. So you've worked closely with CFOs and situations where the companies are growing rapidly, obviously. What have you seen work well and not so well for the most effective CFOs you've worked with?
Look, I work really closely with our CFOs because most of the folks that are in venture capital, growth equity, they may not be classically trained in finance, but they're going to come at things from a financial standpoint. So I think if you're the CFO of a venture or growth equity backed company, you are, for better or worse, you're going to be the one spending a lot of time with the sponsor, right? Because the sponsor is sort of oriented that way. Here's what I would say, big picture. It's all about thinking about how to use financial data to make decisions and how to bring alive the operating metrics in the business on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that are enabling decision making. When we meet companies, often they are looking at a core set of financial metrics, often trailing, takes them 30, 60 days to close the books. Maybe they close once a quarter. And what they're not seeing are real-time customer health metrics. So if I'm looking at my customer base, examples of this would be, where do I have high usage? Where do I have customers who have stopped using the software for some reason? How's the bug backlog? What's the day to day, literally, like what's the wait time right now for customer problems to be resolved? On a forward 60-day, what renewals are coming up? And on a 0 to 10 scale, what do we think the odds are they're going to renew and why? So our great CFOs are real thought leaders and partners to our CEOs. They are not sort of reactive folks that keep the books. They're forward-looking, forward-leaning leaders that are helping the company develop real-time and forward-looking metrics that really enable you to drive the business. And generally, Landon, I would tell you, when we get started, for the most part, metrics are sort of being looked at on a trailing basis versus, a real-time basis. And we try to get to the point where there's some metrics we're looking at every week and there's others we're looking at every month. But either way, it's always about like, where is the puck going in the business? What are the leading indicators? And that takes a great sort of operationally oriented CFO.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that really rings true. And at Williams Marston, we work with 12 or 1,500 companies in a given year, half of which are private equity backed. And that really lines up with what our private equity clients tell us they want their CFOs to be doing, getting out in front of things before they become a problem and being hyper proactive in many ways. Uh, Brian, M33 has been very successful. You've raised, I think, 3 funds so far since inception. As an investor in growth companies, what has been your approach to driving market leading outcomes?
Well, we always start with great teams that have deep domain experience, um, and are solving a really hard problem in a vertical market. So we know going in that our companies are often in markets that are a little bit constrained in size if you just take them at face value. But we're big believers that if you are a market leader in your niche, even if your niche is small, that you can often expand that market through M&A. So we'll often look at a business that might be in a market that if you just quickly looked at it, you say it's an $80 million market. But then you say, well, if you think about geographic expansion, customer base expansion, and then product expansion, are there ways through M&A that we can do that? Some of our companies, for example, ones that might be serving convenience stores or serving utilities, have a very geographic feel to them. If we can acquire a company in California that's doing something similar to what our company does, that's a great way to often bring new logos into the fold. Same thing with product expansion. We may be providing one particular product to our customer, and we always sit with our customer and say, what are the other things you're buying? I am the CFO of a midstream oil and gas company. I'm buying core pipeline accounting from you, but I'm also buying field data capture technology to get data off of the pipeline. And I'm also buying this and that. So our M&A strategy tends to be focused on what are the other products our customers are buying, and can we basically acquire smaller companies to pull them in? And so we like tight vertical markets with vertical market leaders where you've got lots of small point solutions. And generally, for us, it's a lot of M&A. We've done over 30 add-on acquisitions just over the last 4 years with our companies. And it's always from that perspective of broadening the product suite, broadening the customer base, or in some cases, getting into new geographies. So that's really what we look for. We look for a great company that's smaller, maybe in a tight space, but where you can clearly see opportunities to expand the market through M&A.
And are there certain things you want to get in place? You're getting into a company that's never done M&A before. They may be on a QuickBooks, as you mentioned. Are there certain things like putting a CFO in place that you feel like you have to do immediately before you can embark on M&A?
Yeah, we always bring a CFO in immediately, often the first CFO. We get on to monthly reporting packages where we're looking at gross revenue retention, net revenue retention, revenue growth, customer health, bookings per head. I mean, we're looking at a ton of metrics. So we like to get all that stuff running early so that we have a good, solid foundation. And then we like to get the other systems in place, right? Get the sales systems, whether it's HubSpot or Marketo or Salesforce. Get all those pieces together so that as you acquire companies, you can quickly integrate them and scale up. But for us, that first year after we invest in a platform is usually a lot of the systems build, getting key roles in place, and then starting the process of really chasing these acquisitions. Because sometimes the small tuck-ins take some time. It's not as if you just wake up and you find 3 of them. We're always looking for them, but sometimes it may be 6, 12 months into our investment before we close our first tuck-in. But you want to make sure you have a good foundation in place.
Brian, you've been named one of Boston's most influential leaders more than once, I believe. With all the uncertainty in the world today, what advice do you give to entrepreneurs trying to build their businesses while managing risk?
Well, look, I think that sometimes times of uncertainty can be great times to build business. In the Marine Corps, one of the things that officers and staff NCOs and younger Marines are taught is you got to have a bias for action. And a bias for action means that you're not scared of making decisions when you're in uncertain environments and when you have incomplete information. Because the reality is, in business, you almost always are dealing with incomplete information. You're almost always forced to try to move forward without a crystal ball. And I think the best leaders are the ones that understand you got to have a bias for action. You got to take action. You got to move on things. And that's how you learn. You test, you learn, you iterate. But I think the biggest mistake in times of uncertainty is to do nothing, right? So I always think with entrepreneurs that, leaning in, having a bias to do something versus do nothing, and realize that by taking action, you sort of create the environment where you could learn. Because when you take action in a business, you make decisions, you figure out what works and what doesn't work, and you can very quickly stop doing what doesn't work, and you can start doing what does work. And you'll wake up a year later and you'll be in a much better place if you've had the courage to make 8 decisions and iterate your way into the right path than if you had waited. So I think environments of volatility and uncertainty can be a great time to scale businesses because believe me, your customers are feeling it too. And if you can deliver them a great product that might look a little different than it did 6 months ago because what's happening in the world, that's one way you can win in your market.
So don't be afraid to try new things, fail quickly, and never give up, it sounds like.
Test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. The biggest mistake I always think in business and in other parts of life is to sort of do nothing, right? You got to take action. You got to have that bias for leaning into things, and that's how you learn quick.
Right. The worst decision is indecision.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, sometimes in our companies that we get into that perhaps have been sort of a little stagnant, vis-a-vis team and leadership. They've been doing the same thing for a long time. You get to those companies and you'll find that there's 5 ideas that are there, like product ideas where people are like, God, we got to do this. We should do this. And you'll say, well, how long have you guys been talking about this? This is like a great idea. Well, we've been talking about it for 5 years. Like, why you been talking about it for 5 years? Well, this and that, and we got to make sure this happens before that happens, and we're waiting. So there's always a million reasons to do nothing. And with our companies, we try to really compress the decision-making cycle and try to encourage our leaders, get in there and just make the decision, go for it. If it doesn't work, do something else. But it's not uncommon that the idea is there in the organization somewhere. But sometimes it takes some new leadership and some new focus to get it out there and get it live.
Absolutely. Are there any trends or innovations in technology right now that you're excited about?
Well, look, I think when you look at enterprise software, which is everything we do, our companies are solving really hard problems in businesses. So they all, in one way or another, they're automating internal workflows. When most of our companies are in niches where when they're selling software, they're not selling against another software solution, they're selling against do nothing or they're selling against Excel spreadsheets, right? So what I would tell you is that there are still huge swaths of enterprise where things are being done with paper, pencil, Excel spreadsheets, access databases that can be automated. So I think that trend is just going to continue to run. There's a lot to do in AI. Once you've gotten off of Excel spreadsheets into software, you have data in one place, then there's a tremendous amount you could do vis-a-vis forecasting and analytics and everything else. But I run into companies every day who are out there in various end markets providing customers with a software solution that replaces manual processes even today in 2025, right? There's still plenty of problems to be solved that are analog that need to move on to software. So I'm very bullish broadly on the continued penetration of software into all these business applications.
Yeah, and that's really across the board. I mean, you see it, obviously, you're seeing it in earlier stage companies, but we see it in middle market and even, multinational companies. And Excel's been around for 40, 45 years, and it's still, some would say, as prevalent as ever in the financial processes of companies. So it's somewhat amazing, but starting to change. Just pivoting for a minute to private equity, private equity has grown quite a bit over the last 10, 15, 20 years. You've seen the number of public companies decline and the number of privately owned companies increase accordingly. What has changed the most over the past 10 years in private equity from your perspective, and where do you see it evolving over the next 10 years?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's a bigger and more prevalent ownership model. I think I read recently that something like 80% of companies with more than 100 million of revenue these days are private, right? It's amazing. I mean, there's only whatever it is, 5 or 6 thousand public companies, and there's this enormous market of private companies. So to me, that's just sort of a different ownership model. I'm not sure it changes what you have to be successful in your business. I think the benefit of having a sponsor invest in your business if you're a founder is if you want to scale rapidly and you want to do acquisitions, for example, that's the sort of work, if you're going to do it, you probably need to do with a sponsor. You probably can't do it yourself, and it might not be wise to do it yourself. And a lot of these companies are below the size that it takes to go public. When you look at, how big do you have to be to become a public company these days, that number, keeps getting bigger and bigger. So I think sort of the broad ownership of growth, venture, PE, and private companies in many cases enables private companies, if they're ambitious and they want to grow, enables them to scale and grow at a clip which they probably wouldn't be able to if they were doing it, themselves without a partner that could provide not only capital, but also a lot of experience. And the founders we deal with that are interested in doing M&A, generally they've never done M&A, right? So we work with them, we do it. And I've probably closed 50 out on acquisitions in my career. So when I'm sitting with a founder, I can bring a lot to the table of what works and what doesn't. And I think that sort of having a partner that's got that perspective is probably just as important as having access to the capital.
Absolutely. I mean, for someone that's never done an acquisition before, that relationship is crucial to effectively hold your hand through probably one of the biggest decisions and processes they'll go through. Well, Brian, thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights today. Before you go, we have one final question that we ask all of our guests. If you would indulge us, tell us about the best advice you've ever received and the person who gave you that advice.
I think the best advice I ever got was, I'll go back to my days in the Marine Corps, where, I was taught from an early age just about the importance of like being bold and taking a risk, and whether you're building a business or you're leading Marines, if you're going to win, and as they always teach in the Marine Corps, winning is what matters. There's a lot of other things everyone talks about in the world, but General Krulak, one of our great commandants, always reminds us that at the end of the day, there's only one thing that matters, and winning is what matters. And it's true in business, but I think you got to be bold and you got to have an appetite for risk, because I think the businesses that make it, the leaders that make it, almost without exception, you will find at key moments they had the ability to take risk and they leaned into hard decisions. They made hard decisions in the face of uncertain information. And like, that's what enabled them to break through. I think the time to sort of be bold and take risk is the time often when you feel the most uncertain. That's when it's the hardest, because it's a hard decision, because the market's melting down and I got a great acquisition I could do. We could bet the company. That's the moments. Those are the moments. And I think what you find in business for people that there's a business we invested in that was a $5 million revenue company 6 years ago that'll do 50 this year. That's a business where they've made some big key decisions at key times, often in hard markets, and that's what's enabled them to be 10 times the size they were. They never would be there if they hadn't been willing to take the risk and be bold. So that's the advice I would certainly share with entrepreneurs that are coming up who are ambitious.
That's great advice, Brian. Just to summarize a few of the common themes we've talked about today: take risks, be bold, don't be afraid to try new things, fail quickly, and never give up. All words to live by. We've spoken to a number of CFOs on this podcast, and it's been great to speak to an investor to hear your perspectives on leadership and where CFOs should focus as they navigate growth and transformation. We look forward to following your firm's continued success. Thanks again, Brian.
Well, Landon, great to see you today, and I look forward to listening to the podcast. It's a great show.
Thank you for joining us today on the Transformational CFO podcast, where we explore the evolving role of the CFO and the strategies for a successful path forward.
We look forward to having you join our next podcast as we continue the conversation with inspirational finance leaders.
The views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect WilliamsMarston's views. It does not constitute accounting, tax, valuation, or other professional advice or services by Williams Marston, and it may not be relied upon for any purpose. This podcast may not be reproduced or republished in whole or in part without the express written consent of Williams Marston.